"The machine says they're clean," Lieutenant Connor Blake announced, and the words carried across the armory like a verdict no one was allowed to question. At 4:40 in the morning, Fort Braddock's weapons vault glowed under rows of hard white lights, every steel rack polished, every concrete line painted straight, every shadow cut into sharp military angles. 24 M27 rifles lay in two perfect rows on a long inspection table, their black metal catching the pale shine like still water at night. At the far end of the room, the new inspection system hummed inside its armored gray cabinet, a $147,000 monument to certainty with a glass panel, laser housing, pressure sensors, bore mapping software, and a touchscreen bright enough to color every young face in green. On the display, the final report blinked 3 times, then settled into a clean block of text, 2424 cleared for deployment. A quiet ripple of relief passed through the room. Ethan Mercer, the lead civilian technician, exhaled through his nose and tapped the screen with 2 fingers, as if sealing the result with a priest's blessing. "Full pass," he said. "No chamber irregularities, no trigger deviations, no gas alignment flags, no crown distortion. They're good to go." Outside the thick roll-up door, a convoy idled in the cold morning air, diesel engines grumbling low, headlights washing the wet pavement in dull gold. Those rifles were scheduled to leave in less than 40 minutes, bound for a training rotation 3 states away, and everyone in that armory knew what the clock meant. Blake stood beside the table in a crisp uniform, young, square-jawed, and pleased with the order of his world. He looked at the rifles, then at the soldiers gathered around them, and smiled with the confidence of a man who had never seen a perfect report betray him. "That," he said, raising his voice just enough for the room, "is what certainty looks like." A few of the younger soldiers nodded. Someone gave a soft laugh. Ethan folded his arms, proud and tired. The way men look after a machine has made them feel smarter than their own hands. But near the back wall, half hidden beside a cabinet of cleaning rods and old canvas slings, Walter Hayes did not move. He was 82 years old, white-haired, narrow-shouldered, and dressed in a faded brown work jacket that looked older than some of the rifles on the table. His hands rested lightly on the top of a worn leather tool pouch, the kind no procurement office would ever buy now. His face was calm, but his eyes were not soft. They were pale blue, steady, and fixed on the 3rd rifle from the left in the 2nd row. He had not applauded the test. He had not smiled at the green screen. He had watched the rifles the way other men listened to weather. Blake noticed him only after the silence began to feel uneven. "Can we help you, sir?" he asked, and the word "sir" carried more procedure than respect. Walter's gaze stayed on the table. The armory hummed around him, vents whispering overhead, fluorescent lights ticking faintly, the inspection system cooling itself with a gentle mechanical breath. Then the old man spoke, quiet enough that several soldiers leaned in without realizing it. "Run them again." The room changed. Not loudly. Not all at once. It changed the way a flag changes when the wind shifts before a storm. Ethan turned from the touchscreen, eyebrows lifting. Blake gave a short, dry chuckle, waiting for Walter to smile and take the words back. He did not. The old veteran kept looking at the rifles, especially that one rifle in the 2nd row, as if a thin wrongness had risen from it that only he could hear. Blake stepped closer, boots clicking once on the sealed floor. "Mr. Hayes," he said, voice tightening. "That system just completed a full diagnostic sweep. Twice." Walter finally looked at him. There was no challenge in his expression, no anger, no attempt to impress anyone in the room. That somehow made it worse. "Then it missed it twice," he said. Blake stared at Walter for a full second, and in that second the young lieutenant's smile thinned into something colder. The armory was too bright, too clean, too full of witnesses for him to let an old man's quiet sentence hang unanswered. "It missed nothing," Blake said, each word clipped flat. "This is not a field table in 1968. This is a controlled weapons vault with calibrated equipment, certified software, and a full electronic chain of custody." Ethan Mercer gave a small nod, grateful for the defense, then turned the touchscreen slightly so Walter could see the green results. The platform ran bore mapping at 360 degrees, chamber imaging, trigger weight analysis, gas system pressure checks, sight alignment, and tolerance comparison against factory baseline. Every rifle passed within acceptable range. He said it with the tired patience of a man explaining electricity to someone holding a candle. Walter looked at the screen, then back at the rifles. The green light reflected faintly in his eyes, but it did not change them. Acceptable is a wide word, he said. A few soldiers shifted. Somebody near the rear gave a low cough to hide a laugh. Blake caught it and let it feed him. He stepped closer to Walter, stopping beside the inspection table, one hand resting on the edge as if claiming the room itself. With respect, Mr. Hayes, we are on a deployment clock. Those rifles are already logged, sealed, and assigned. I cannot stop an outbound convoy because a retiree has a feeling. The word retiree landed soft, but it carried a blade. Walter's right thumb moved once across the worn snap of his leather pouch. He did not answer. Ethan crossed his arms. He was not cruel by nature, only proud, and pride can make decent men sound smaller than they are. Look, sir, he said, softening his voice in a way that made it worse. I am sure you knew rifles back in your day. Nobody is taking that away from you. But these weapons have been through a digital inspection suite that can detect deviations smaller than 1/1000th of an inch. Human eyes cannot compete with that. Walter turned his head slowly toward him. Human eyes built the numbers your machine trusts. Ethan blinked, and the room went still again. Blake gave a short laugh. Too quick, too sharp. That is a nice line, but it does not change procedure. Procedure says these rifles are clear. He pointed toward the screen. That system says they are clear. Walter's gaze drifted back to the third rifle from the left in the second row, then to the 7th, then the 9th. His eyes moved with strange economy, never wandering, never searching like a man guessing. He looked as if he were reading a page everyone else had mistaken for a blank wall. Outside, the convoy engines rumbled louder for a moment, a low vibration passing through the concrete floor and up through the metal legs of the inspection table. The rifles trembled almost imperceptibly in their cradles. Walter noticed. No one else did. He leaned forward half an inch, just enough for the white light to catch the lines in his face. Who cleaned number 7? He asked. Blake looked at Ethan. Ethan looked down at the tablet clipped to his belt, flicking through the service log with a finger. Rotational maintenance team, he said. Night shift. Standard cleaning, standard lubrication, standard check-in. What? Walter did not answer the question. His eyes stayed on the rifle. Was it fired before it came in? Training cycle last week, Ethan said. 300 rounds, maybe 350. Nothing unusual. Blake's patience broke into a visible line across his jaw. Enough. We are not doing this. We are not building a mystery around a rifle that has already passed inspection. Walter lifted his hand, not touching the weapon yet, only hovering above it. His fingers were old, knuckled, marked by years of weather and work, but there was nothing uncertain in them. Steel tells on itself, he said. Only if you know when it is whispering. The younger soldiers stopped smiling. Blake looked from Walter's hand to his face, and for the first time, beneath his irritation, something like doubt tried to enter the room. He crushed it quickly. Mr. Hayes, he said, voice lower now. This is a restricted armory. You are here as a courtesy because Colonel Whitaker signed your visitor authorization. Do not make me regret honoring that. Walter finally looked fully at him. The old man's face remained calm, but the air around him seemed to grow heavier, as if the room had discovered weight it did not know it had. Lieutenant, he said, honor is not paperwork. The word paperwork stayed in the air longer than it should have. It seemed to settle on the polished rifles, on the tablet in Ethan Mercer's hand, on the young faces waiting to see which kind of authority would win. Lieutenant Connor Blake straightened, and the movement was small but deliberate. He was not a man used to being corrected in front of enlisted soldiers, especially not by someone wearing a faded work jacket and carrying a pouch that looked like it had spent 40 years in the back of a pickup truck. You need to understand something, Blake said, his voice low enough to sound controlled and loud enough for everyone to hear. This room runs on procedure, not instinct. Not stories. Not whatever people used to do before modern accountability existed. Walter Hayes did not blink. Behind Blake, the touchscreen still glowed green, patient and certain, while the convoy outside kept humming against the morning. 31 minutes remained before departure. A red digital clock above the security cage marked each second with ruthless simplicity. Ethan glanced at it, then at the rifles, and the pressure in his face tightened. "Lieutenant," he said carefully, "we can sign the manifest in 5 minutes if we do not get dragged off schedule." Blake nodded once, grateful for the practical excuse. "Exactly." He turned back to Walter. "These rifles are assigned to Bravo Company for a live training rotation in Oklahoma. They have serial confirmations, inspection records, and transport seals ready to print. If we delay them, the entire movement gets flagged. That means calls from battalion, calls from operations, and a report on my desk before breakfast. So unless you can show me a documented failure, this conversation is over." Walter looked past him toward the rifles again. His eyes moved from number 7 to number 12, then to the far end of the table, where rifle 22 rested under the white light with the same innocent stillness as all the others. "Documented failure usually arrives late," he said. A young private near the cleaning bench shifted his boots. His name tape read Cole. Private First Class Ryan Cole had been quiet since Walter entered the armory, quiet in the way young soldiers are quiet when they sense something important but do not yet have the rank to name it. He watched Walter's hands. Not his face, not his jacket. His hands. They did not flutter. They did not wander. They hovered near the rifles with a strange restraint, as if touching them too soon would be disrespectful. Ryan had seen armorers handle rifles all year. He had seen technicians measure, wipe, tag, log, and rack them. He had never seen anyone listen to one. Blake followed Walter's gaze and frowned. "Stop staring at the table like that." Walter said nothing. Ethan let out a breath through his teeth. "Sir, with all respect, what exactly do you think you are seeing?" The question carried a challenge, but also a thread of curiosity he probably did not intend to reveal. Walter finally stepped closer to the inspection table. The soldiers parted without being ordered. His boots made almost no sound on the sealed floor. He stopped beside rifle number 7, still without touching it. The weapon lay in its cradle, clean, tagged, and approved, a strip of white inspection tape looped neatly through the trigger guard. Walter leaned just slightly, letting the light angle across the bolt, the ejection port, the dull edge of the chamber. His face changed by almost nothing, but Ryan Cole saw the change anyway. A narrowing of the eyes, a pause in the breathing, the smallest tightening at the corner of the mouth. "This one was cleaned fast," Walter said. Ethan looked down at his tablet again, annoyed despite himself. Night shift had a lot to process. "Not careless," Walter said. "Fast." Blake folded his arms. "There is a difference?" Walter looked at him then, and the room seemed to lose another degree of warmth. "There is always a difference." Outside, one of the convoy drivers tapped a horn once, not impatiently, just a reminder from the world beyond the vault that time was moving. Blake turned toward the sound, then back, irritation hardening into decision. "Print the seals," he ordered Ethan. "We are done here." Ethan reached for the tablet command. Walter's voice stopped his finger before it touched the glass. "If that rifle leaves this room," the old man said, quiet as dust settling on steel, "someone downrange is going to learn the machine was wrong." The sentence stopped Ethan Mercer cold. His finger hovered above the tablet, suspended over the command that would print the transport seals and turn 24 rifles from inspected equipment into deployed responsibility. Lieutenant Connor Blake saw the hesitation and his face hardened. "Do not pause because of that," he said. Ethan swallowed, but did not press the screen. Walter Hayes stood beside rifle number 7, still calm, still not touching it, and somehow that restraint had become the most powerful thing in the room. The old man was not acting like a protester. He was not raising his voice. He was not pleading for attention. He simply stood there with the patience of stone, waiting for everyone else to catch up to what he already knew. Blake stepped between Walter and the table, using his body like a barrier. "You have made your point," he said. "You do not trust the system. Noted. Now step back." Walter's eyes moved to the lieutenant's hand, which had landed inches from the rifle's receiver. "Do not lean on the table." Blake looked down, annoyed. "Excuse me." "Do not lean on the table," Walter repeated. "It changes the light." A small laugh escaped from one of the soldiers near the lockers, nervous and uncertain. Blake turned his head just enough to silence it. Then he looked back at Walter with a thin smile. The light. Ethan, still holding the tablet, glanced at the rifles. The hard white glow from overhead reflected along their metal surfaces in straight, sterile lines. To him, it was just glare. To Walter, it was a language. The old veteran reached slowly into his leather pouch and removed a small white cloth, folded into a square, so worn the edges had gone soft. Then came a narrow penlight, its brass casing dulled by years of use, and a short steel inspection rod with a wooden handle polished dark by the shape of his palm. The tools looked almost embarrassingly simple beside the gray digital cabinet humming at the end of the room. Blake's smile sharpened. "You carry that around with you?" Walter laid the cloth on the table. "Some men carry what kept them honest." Ethan looked at the old rod and could not stop himself. "That thing belongs in a museum." Walter did not answer. He placed the penlight beside the cloth, parallel to the rifle, exact as a compass needle. His movements were slow, but not weak. Every gesture had the clean economy of a habit repeated so many times it no longer required thought. Blake watched him with open irritation. "Mr. Hayes, this is not a demonstration booth at a county fair." Walter finally touched rifle number 7. Not the grip, not the barrel. 2 fingers rested near the ejection port, light as paper. The room seemed to hold its breath around the contact. "No," he said. "It is a room full of young men about to trust a green screen with their lives." Blake's jaw flexed. "Careful." Walter's thumb moved along the edge of the bolt carrier, barely grazing the surface. "I am being careful." Ethan opened his mouth to object, but the words did not come. Walter tilted the rifle under the light by less than an inch, then stopped. A thin line of reflection broke strangely along the metal, a brief interruption so small most eyes would have dismissed it as dust. Walter saw it. Ryan Cole saw that Walter saw it. The old man set the rifle back down and picked up the cloth. He did not wipe the whole weapon. He touched one place only, a tiny crescent near the chamber edge, then held the cloth under the penlight. A gray mark appeared against the white fabric, faint but real. Ethan leaned closer despite himself. Blake noticed and snapped, "Do not encourage this." Walter looked at Ethan. "Your machine measured the rifle clean." Ethan's eyes stayed on the cloth. "It did. It measured the shape," Walter said, "not the behavior." The words were quiet, but they landed with more weight than Blake's orders. Walter set the cloth down and moved to rifle number 12 without asking permission. Blake reached out as if to stop him, then hesitated because every soldier in the room was watching now. And stopping an old man from touching a rifle he had already begun to prove wrong felt suddenly less like authority and more like fear. Walter did not look at him. "A machine can tell you what metal is," he said, lowering the penlight until the beam ran like a thin sunrise across the next receiver. "But it cannot always tell you what metal remembers." The phrase seemed to follow Walter Hayes as he bent over rifle number 12, passing through the white light and settling somewhere deeper than the armory walls. "Metal remembers." To Lieutenant Connor Blake, it sounded like another old saying, the kind men used when they wanted mystery to stand in for proof. To Ethan Mercer, it sounded impossible, yet his eyes kept returning to the gray mark on the cloth, faint as pencil dust and far too precise to ignore. Walter lifted the rifle just enough for the penlight to run along the upper receiver. The beam touched oil, steel, shadow, and then a nearly invisible break in the reflection. His fingers stopped. The room around him began to thin. The fluorescent lights softened into another kind of brightness, dimmer, lower, trembling through canvas and rain. The smell came first, as it always did. Not the clean solvent of Fort Braddock, not the polished floor or the climate-controlled vault, but old oil warmed by tired hands, wet canvas, damp earth, and the sharp mineral scent of steel that had been carried too long in bad weather. Walter was young again, though the memory did not announce it. It simply placed him there, kneeling beside a folding field table under a sagging tarp, his sleeves dark with rain, his fingers steady because they had to be. Around him, men spoke in low voices, not out of fear, but out of discipline. A radio whispered somewhere beyond the tarp. Water tapped on ammunition cans. A lantern flickered in the wind and threw long shadows over a row of rifles waiting to be checked before sunrise. One of them had looked perfect. Clean bore, smooth action, proper weight. Nothing a checklist could condemn. But Walter had felt something wrong when the bolt moved under his hand. A hesitation smaller than a word, a faint drag where there should have been only motion. A younger man beside him, barely old enough to shave, had laughed softly and said, "Hayes, you hear ghosts in these things." Walter remembered looking at him, not angry, not offended, only certain. No, he had said. I hear when they stop telling the truth. He had stripped the rifle. Down under the lantern, found the tiny burr hidden where careless eyes would pass over it, and set the weapon aside before it could betray anyone who trusted it. No shouting followed. No medal. No speech. Just a quiet nod from a sergeant at the end of the table and the heavy understanding that small things, ignored long enough, become large things at the worst possible time. The memory shifted, as memories do, not in order but in weight. A different morning. A different rack. A rifle with a sight that looked straight until light struck it sideways. Another with a spring that passed every measure but answered too slowly in the hand. Another with a crown so slightly worn that only the path of reflected rain gave it away. Walter had learned then that machines, gauges, and forms were useful servants, but dangerous masters. They could measure what they were asked to measure. They could not worry. They could not remember the sound of a young man saying, "Are you sure?" and the silence that followed when being sure was the only job that mattered. The armory came back all at once. The hum of the inspection cabinet. The low diesel rumble outside. The red clock above the cage. 26 minutes. Walter's hand was still on rifle number 12, his thumb near the gas key, his penlight held at a shallow angle. For a moment, nobody spoke. Blake studied the old veteran's face and found no performance there, only distance, as if Walter had walked far away and returned carrying something the rest of them could not see. Ethan's voice came quieter than before. "What is wrong with that one?" Walter lowered the rifle onto the cloth with care. Gas key drift beginning at the rear stake. Ethan looked quickly at his tablet. The pressure check passed. "Today," Walter said. Blake let out a controlled breath, but it no longer sounded confident. "That is not a failure." Walter looked at him, and his pale blue eyes were no longer simply calm. They were tired in a way that made the room feel young. That is how failure introduces itself. Walter Hayes moved to the third rifle without asking permission, and this time no one stepped in front of him. Lieutenant Connor Blake remained near. The end of the table, arms folded, face set hard, but the certainty that had carried him through the morning had begun to lose its clean edge. Ethan Mercer stood beside the touchscreen with his tablet lowered, no longer using it as a shield. Private First Class Ryan Cole watched from near the cleaning bench, his attention fixed on Walter's hands, as if the old man were translating a language the room had forgotten it once spoke. Walter angled the penlight across the muzzle of rifle number 3. For a moment, the beam showed nothing but black steel and a perfect circle. Then he shifted the light a fraction of an inch. The reflection bent. Not much, barely enough to trouble the eye. Walter set the rifle down on the white cloth. "Crown distortion," he said. Ethan stepped closer despite himself. The bore map passed. "The bore is fine," Walter said. "The crown is not." Blake gave a tight shake of his head. "You cannot call that from a reflection." Walter did not look up. "I just did." The words were not proud. That made them worse. He moved to rifle number 7, the one he had watched from the beginning. His fingers touched the charging handle, then stopped at the ejection port. He did not cycle the weapon. He did not perform any dramatic motion. He only pressed lightly, listening through his fingertips. "Extractor tension is weak," he said. Ethan frowned, now scrolling fast through his tablet. That passed the mechanical resistance check. Walter picked up the cloth with the gray mark and folded it once. Mechanical resistance is not the same thing as return under heat. Blake's eyes narrowed. Under heat? These are not on a range right now. That is the point, Walter said. He moved on before Blake could answer. Rifle number 9 looked perfect, cleaner than the others, almost too clean. Walter lowered the penlight into the chamber angle and paused. The smallest line appeared at the edge of the light, a tiny interruption where smoothness should have continued unbroken. "Chamber burr," he said. Ethan whispered, almost to himself, "No way." Walter heard him. There is always a way. The room had become so quiet that the convoy outside sounded far away, like weather beyond a sealed window. Walter set rifle number 9 beside the first 2. 3 rifles now rested apart from the approved row. Their white tags still said cleared. Their position on the cloth said something else. Blake looked at the separated rifles, then at the soldiers watching him. "This is turning into theater," he said, but his voice did not fill the room the way it had before. Walter reached rifle number 12 again. Gas key drift beginning at the rear stake. He repeated, and set it aside with the others. 4. Then rifle number 15. He placed 2 fingers near the trigger guard, careful, controlled, not pulling, only testing movement with the smallest pressure. His face remained still, but his hand stopped before anyone else would have noticed a reason. Trigger creep outside feel tolerance. Ethan looked up sharply. Feel tolerance is not a category. It is before the category gets a name, Walter said. 5. Rifle number 19 came next. Walter did not touch the receiver first. He crouched slightly, old knees bending with effort he refused to show, and looked down the sight line from a shallow angle. The front post stood proud and black under the lights. To Blake it looked straight. To Ethan it looked straight. To every young soldier in the room, it looked straight because they wanted it to. Walter exhaled once. Front sight post is leaning right. Blake stepped forward. That is impossible. The alignment skin passed. Walter pointed, not at the sight, but at the shadow it made against the white table surface. The scan read center. The shadow read truth. 6. By then Ethan's face had gone pale in the green screen glow. He was no longer defending the system. He was counting. Everyone was counting. Walter stopped at rifle number 22. He did not pick it up right away. He looked at it for several seconds, and something in that pause made Ryan Cole's stomach tighten. Finally, Walter lifted it with both hands and angled the locking lugs toward the penlight. Nothing appeared. Then he breathed slowly across the metal, fogging it for less than a second. A fine line surfaced and vanished. Hairline stress, Walter said. Ethan took one. Step back. Blake said nothing. Walter laid the 7th rifle beside the others. 7 rifles. 7 white tags. 7 quiet accusations against a room that had mistaken approval for truth. The red clock above the cage showed 23 minutes. Walter folded his cloth, returned the penlight to his pouch, and looked at the green touchscreen without anger. Now, he said, you can run them again. For several seconds after Walter Hayes spoke, nobody moved. The 7 rifles lay apart from the others like a silent row of unanswered questions, each still wearing the clean white tag that said it had passed. The green screen at the end of the table continued to glow with perfect confidence, but the room no longer believed it in the same way. Lieutenant Connor Blake looked at the separated rifles, then at Ethan Mercer, then at the young soldiers gathered around the table. He could feel control slipping, and control was the one thing he had trusted more than rank. Nobody touches anything, Blake said, his voice sharp enough to make 2 privates straighten. We are not turning this armory into a guessing game. Ethan did not answer. His eyes were fixed on rifle number 22, the one with the hairline stress that had appeared for less than a breath, and then disappeared again like a secret ashamed of itself. Ethan, Blake snapped. Run the flagged rifles again. The technician blinked. You want me to run them? Yes. You wanted proof. Get proof. The words sounded like an order, but everyone heard the strain beneath them. Ethan carried rifle number 3 to the inspection cradle with more care than he had used earlier. The digital cabinet accepted the weapon with a soft mechanical lock. Its sensors woke, motors adjusted, and a thin blue laser traveled down the barrel in a clean, clinical line. The screen filled with measurements. Numbers. Graphs. Tolerance windows. For a moment, it looked as if the machine would defend itself. Then the result appeared. Pass. Blake exhaled through his nose. There. Walter said nothing. He only watched Ethan. The technician did not smile. He leaned closer to the screen, tapped into the secondary imaging layer, and magnified the muzzle profile. The main results still said pass, but near the edge of the expanded view, a tiny irregularity bent the contour by a fraction, so small the software had rounded it away. Ethan's face changed. It is there, he said quietly. Blake turned on him. What? Ethan swallowed. The system did not flag it because it is below automatic rejection threshold. But it is there. A murmur moved through the soldiers and died fast. Private First Class Ryan Cole felt his pulse climb. He had been watching Walter since the old man first asked to run the rifles again, and now a memory nudged at him from somewhere outside the present morning. Not a full memory at first, just a photograph. Dusty glass. A hallway near the rear of the armory where old unit pictures hung crookedly above a row of filing cabinets no one used. Ryan had seen it during inventory duty 2 weeks earlier. A black and white image of a much younger man beside a field weapons table, sleeves rolled, head bowed over a rifle. The caption beneath it had been faded, but one sentence had stayed with him because it sounded less like a label and more like a prayer. Hayes checked it. "We came home." Ryan looked at Walter's hands now and felt the sentence return with weight. Blake ordered Ethan to run rifle number 7. The machine passed it. Ethan opened the deeper resistance trace. His mouth went dry. "Extractor return is slow at the end of travel," he said. "Still inside tolerance, but barely." Rifle number 9 passed, then revealed the chamber burr on magnified review. Rifle number 12 passed, then showed an uneven pressure signature when Ethan forced a comparative overlay. The machine was not lying. That was what made it worse. It had told the truth it had been programmed to tell, and missed the truth Walter had learned to fear. Ryan Cole stepped backward from the table, unnoticed by Blake, and moved toward the side door near the cleaning lockers. His hand found his phone before he had fully decided to use it. He knew the chain of command. He knew what happened to young soldiers who created problems above their pay grade. But he also knew what he was seeing. This was no longer an old man disagreeing with a screen. This was a room full of cleared rifles slowly becoming evidence. Ryan slipped into the narrow hall outside the vault, where the air smelled of floor wax and cold concrete. He scrolled fast until he found Master Sergeant Paul Brennan, the senior armorer on early duty. The call rang once, twice. A rough voice answered. "Brennan." Ryan kept his voice low. "Master Sergeant, this is Private First Class Cole in the main armory." "Sir, I think you need to come here." "Why?" A visitor named Walter Hayes found 7 faults in the outbound rifles. The line went silent. Not confused silent. Not irritated silent. The kind of silence that happens when a name unlocks a door in someone's past. When Brennan spoke again, his voice had lost all sleep. "Say that name again." Ryan looked back through the small window in the door. Walter stood under the white lights, alone beside the table, while Blake argued with a machine that was starting to betray him by inches. "Walter Hayes, sir." Brennan's answer came hard and immediate. "Do not let anyone sign that manifest. Put the rifles down. I am calling Colonel Whitaker right now." Ryan Cole returned to the armory with the phone still in his hand and the color drained from his face. Nobody noticed him at first. All eyes were on the inspection table, where Ethan Mercer had begun to run the 5th rifle through the secondary review with a kind of grim obedience, no longer trying to prove Walter Hayes wrong, only trying to understand how many times the green screen had been allowed to speak too soon. Lieutenant Connor Blake stood rigid beside him, one hand on his hip, the other curled into a fist he did not seem aware he was making. "This does not stop the convoy," Blake said, though the words sounded more like something he needed to hear than something anyone else believed. Ethan did not look away from the monitor. "Lieutenant, the secondary layer is showing anomalies on every rifle Mr. Hayes separated." Blake's eyes cut toward him. "Anomalies are not failures." Walter stood at the far side of the table, his leather pouch closed now, both hands resting on it. The old veteran had stepped back after the 7th rifle, as if the work was finished and the rest belonged to men still learning how to accept it. "They will be," he said. Blake turned on him. "You keep saying that like it is evidence." Walter met his stare without heat. "No, I keep saying it because evidence is what people ask for after they stop listening." The room went still again. Before Blake could answer, the side door opened, and Master Sergeant Paul Brennan entered so quickly that the door struck the rubber stop with a flat crack. He was a thick-shouldered man in his late 50s, close-cropped gray hair, sleeves rolled, face still marked by sleep and urgency. He did not ask what was happening. He looked at the 7 rifles on the cloth, then at Walter Hayes, and his expression changed in front of everyone. The hardness left first, then the rank, then the years. For one brief second, Brennan looked like a young armorer seeing a legend walk out of an old photograph. "Mr. Hayes," he said, voice lower than anyone expected. Walter gave him a small nod. "Paul." Blake's eyes narrowed. "Master Sergeant, you know this man?" Brennan looked at him as if the question itself revealed the problem. "Lieutenant, there are rooms in this armory that still have his notes taped inside the cabinets." Ethan looked up from the screen. Ryan Cole stood near the lockers, barely breathing. Blake flushed. "He is a visitor. He is Walter Hayes," Brennan said, and the name landed with a weight no rank could counterfeit. "And if he pulled 7 rifles off that table, those 7 rifles stay off that table until Colonel Whitaker says otherwise." Blake stiffened. Colonel Whitaker is being called over a maintenance disagreement? Brennan's jaw tightened. Colonel Whitaker has already been called. Outside, the convoy engines changed pitch. A driver revved once, then let the engine settle. The red clock above the cage showed 18 minutes. Blake turned toward the sealed manifest printer, then toward Ethan. Do not stop processing. Brennan stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Nobody prints that manifest. Blake's posture sharpened. Master Sergeant, I am the officer responsible for this movement. Then be responsible, Brennan said. The words were quiet, but they cut clean. Ethan slowly took his hand away from the tablet. In the silence that followed, a distant sound rose from beyond the armory door. Fast footsteps in the corridor, more than one set, hard soles striking concrete with purpose. Every soldier in the room turned. The security panel chirped. The main door opened. Colonel Thomas Whitaker entered without his cover, his field jacket half-zipped, silver hair uncombed at the edges as if he had left his office before anyone could finish explaining. Two aides followed behind him, both moving fast to keep up. Whitaker did not look at the touchscreen first. He did not look at Blake. He did not even look at the 7 rifles. His eyes found Walter Hayes at the far side of the table, and the whole room felt the impact of recognition before a word was spoken. The colonel slowed. His face, stern a moment earlier, changed into something older and more careful. Mr. Hayes, he said. Walter stood a little straighter, not from pride, but from habit. Colonel. Whitaker glanced at the separated rifles. Brennan told me you found 7. Walter looked at the table, then at the young soldiers, then at the convoy lights bleeding under the bottom of the door. I found enough. Whitaker turned immediately to Blake. The warmth vanished from his face. Lock the armory. Stop the convoy. Full manual inspection on all 24 rifles. Blake opened his mouth, then closed it. Sir, the system cleared them. Whitaker's eyes did not move. Lieutenant, that system is a tool. He turned slightly, so every soldier could hear him. Mr. Hayes is the reason tools like that exist. The order struck the room harder than any alarm could have. Ethan Mercer shut down the automatic workflow, and the green screen that had ruled the morning faded into a dull, standby glow. Master Sergeant Paul Brennan moved with a speed that made his age disappear, assigning 2 armorers to each station, calling out serial numbers, pulling logs, opening trays, setting gauges and lights across the table in a quiet storm of discipline. The convoy outside went silent one engine at a time until only the cold morning wind pushed against the roll-up door. Lieutenant Connor Blake stood near the manifest printer, no longer speaking, his unsigned paperwork resting beneath his hand like a mistake that had almost become official. Colonel Thomas Whitaker watched the inspection begin, his face unreadable, but his eyes never stayed away from the 7 rifles Walter Hayes had separated. One by one, the truth arrived without drama. Rifle number 3 showed crown distortion under manual magnification, small enough for software to forgive, clear enough for an old hand to condemn. Rifle number 7 showed weak extractor return at the edge of heat tolerance. Rifle number 9 revealed a chamber burr that caught the light like a grain of sand in glass. Rifle number 12 showed the first sign of gas key drift. Rifle number 15 carried trigger creep, no chart had named yet. Rifle number 19 held a front sight post leaning just enough to matter at distance. Rifle number 22, after a second careful check, showed the hairline stress Walter had seen and everyone else had missed. Each confirmation printed with a soft mechanical sound. No one cheered. No one cursed. The reports slid from the printer and stacked on the tray, page after page, each one quieter than blame and heavier than apology. Ethan stood over the final sheet, both hands resting on the edge of the table. His pride had drained from him, but not his professionalism. He looked at Walter across the rifles and spoke with difficulty. Mr. Hayes, I do not know how you saw all 7. Walter folded his white cloth and returned it to the leather pouch. I did not see all of them, he said. Some I felt. Some I remembered. Blake lowered his eyes. The young lieutenant's face had lost its sharpness. What remained was not humiliation exactly, but the first painful shape of understanding. He stepped toward Walter, stopped, and seemed to search for the right military sentence before finding only a human one. Sir, he said, voice rough, I was wrong. Walter looked at him for a long moment. The old veteran could have made the room smaller for him. He could have repeated every careless word, every thin insult, every time the green screen had been treated as wiser than experience. Instead, he only nodded once. Then be better next time. Colonel Whitaker turned to the assembled soldiers. Listen carefully, he said. The system stays. The procedures stay. The standards stay. But none of those things replace judgment. They support it. A clean report is not the end of responsibility. It is where responsibility begins. His gaze moved from Ethan to Blake, then to the youngest soldiers near the wall. This man spent a lifetime learning what failure sounds like before it gets loud. That is not superstition. That is service. The armory fell into a silence so complete that the ticking lights seemed audible. Then Whitaker faced Walter fully, brought his heels together, and raised his hand in a slow, formal salute. Master Sergeant Brennan followed. Then Ryan Cole. Then Ethan Mercer, awkwardly but sincerely. One by one, every soldier in the room stood straighter until the old man with the faded jacket and worn leather pouch was surrounded by the respect no machine could generate and no rank could demand. Walter did not smile. He simply accepted the salute with a small lift of his weathered hand, more tired than triumphant. After a moment, he looked back at the remaining rifles, the ones cleared again by human eyes and careful hands. Now, he said, his voice low beneath the white armory lights, they are ready. And nobody in that room ever heard a green screen the same way again. Machines can measure metal, but memory knows what failure sounds like.